Okay, in Chapter 16, we deal with two concepts: material requirements planning, or MRP, which is an application to inventory management, and enterprise resource planning, which is ERP, and we'll talk about both of those things. MRP is used to manage dependent demand. In the prior chapter, we talked about independent demand. But here, we want to plan the raw materials, purchase parts, and work in process. And it's driven by the master schedule that I alluded to in earlier chapters. You take your demand, your capacity, your detailed scheduling, and drive that all into the lowest and most detailed level that you can. You explode your requirements through the use of a bill of material to determine how many units of any particular part you may need to use within that master schedule and when. And then you take the schedule, incorporate your lead times factors, and one last thing, you've heard me talk about a push and a pull system. Well, a pull system is when you have to pull things out on an order by order basis. A push system is when you're planning your production and your inventories accordingly to what your demand forecast calls for. MRP systems have been around since the early 70s, and IBM was one of the first to develop software and computers that manage inventories by MRPs. And there are different types of MRPs. One is inventory control. That's the earliest one. The type 2, they started incorporating manufacturing resource planning, which include people and machines in there. And type 3, which we'll talk about today, is going to the current level of enterprise resource planning as well. 3 functions of MRP are inventory, priorities, and capacity. You take these and consider the elements of them and incorporate them into your calculation of basically what you're trying to get to is what to order and when, so that you have optimization of inventory. Figure 16.1 gives you a closed loop MRP system to get a visual of how all these elements come together and what the sequence and flow is of these elements. We talked about different types of inputs, and the 3 inputs that go into an MRP system are: you have to have a master schedule first, you have to have defined your bill of material, and then you have to input a record of your starting inventory. The next element is capacity planning. We talked about that in earlier chapters, and you have to incorporate what you've determined your capacity capabilities are. And the third main important element is what we call planned order releases, or outputs, and that means when do you plan on buying anything and when do you plan on making something. And we're looking at completion dates, not interim dates in each of those things. Once again, you're looking at the master schedule, which is a schedule or a system in itself. The bill of materials is its own. It's almost a spreadsheet with the product structure detailed in there. And the final input that we mentioned was a list of your inventory, and usually it's a master file that gives you a complete detail list of all the items and balances. And there are different charts you'll look at as examples of bills of materials for different products. We'll go into examples of that. So there are charts in your textbook and tables that help you get a visual on that. In Table 16.4, here's an example of how you can look at a materials plan and try to identify some of the elements and their dynamics in terms of how they get used in an MRP system. Likewise, in a master schedule, the master schedule, as we said, is a top-level driver that gives you a big picture over a longer period of time of what you think you're going to need, and then you translate it into look at your capacity, what you're capable of doing, and then determine what your inventory needs are. Bill of material, as we said just a moment ago, is the detail of all the parts and that you need to finish the product, and what will happen is that bill of material will be used to explode your inventory lists, or sometimes that bill of material has to go back to engineering for a change order when they're redesigning a particular product. Inventory records deal with several elements. Some of it is things like part numbers and identification issues. Some of it is material requirements and dependencies. And some of it goes back to your backlog and identify what orders are they linked with. The important thing here is the accuracy of the records. If your information is not accurate, your calculations will be worthless. One of the things you do to make sure your information is accurate is you periodically count inventory. Now there are two ways of doing that. One is the periodic count could either be once a year or could even be once a month. But more often when you go to once a month, you're going more to a cycle count where you don't count all the inventory at one time, but you break it up and say, well, in January I'll count raw material, in February I'll count work in process, in March I'll count finished goods, and then I'll repeat that cycle for every quarter like that. That's more of a cycle counting type of approach. When you do annual counts, there's a big need to plan it very much and to be extremely careful, because doing it once a year kind of lends itself to more mistakes and less accuracy. Sometimes you have to bring outside people in to oversee it, such as auditors. And the other real disadvantage is that usually you have to shut down your production or else you lose control if parts are moving while you're trying to count. In a cycle count, however, you can isolate just segments of your inventory. It is possible to continue some of your production, but quite often, excuse me, it's even good to stop your production when you're cycle counting as well. Future types of operations will probably need to incorporate different ways of counting and control. That will depend on whether you have process flows, liquid flows, or parts flows. So we're always going to have to be looking out for new processes and new ways of taking inventory. Keeping in mind what we've said about capacity planning and master scheduling, we can approach that in several different ways, and the reason we do that is because this is a lead into the last subject, which is resource planning. You can take a rough cut capacity approach, which basically says, as a ballpark, this is what my capacity is. Or you can go into it in detail and try to say on various basis, what is my capacity, either area by area or even job by job. And purchasing is an important part of ERP because and MRP, because especially today when we're offloading so much of our work, we are going to outside vendors. And the reason we do that is we try to focus our own capabilities on the things we do best. And that way we become more efficient on our own core competencies. Shop floor control means just that. You're trying to get your arms around the specific part of the production floor where there's production going on and it's related to specific orders, and you're just trying to get as much control around that so that you're not losing records or inventory during that process. When running an MRP system, some important questions is how much safety stock do you carry? How much lead time do you need for your safety stock? And what kind of systems do you use? Some companies, they don't do things at a detail level. They don't need to, and they use what we call an informal system. That that's the close enough kind of concepts. Whereas in a formal system, you're trying to emphasize a level of preciseness because it's very important not to have that much mistakes. What do you need for an MRP system? Good planning, a good computer system, accurate data. Management should constantly be involved, and your user knowledge has to, so communication is very important too. Operating that system, always have to maintain good records. So that's trying to run an MRP without the cost of hands-on control is a mistake. But a master schedule that's very consistent and realistic is important. A good bill of material to deal with any change orders, and if design engineering hasn't kept up with some of their redesigns and documentation, then the MRP system is only as good as the information it gets. Good capacity planning, and most of all, very important reports and consistency in them. In an enterprise resource planning system, ERP, you're trying to integrate all the functions through a common database and standardize the operations as much as possible. You do this to coordinate decisions, especially with respect to the supply chain. And again, I'll reemphasize what I said earlier, is the ERP system has become more accepted and predominant because companies have found that they are better off going and outsourcing things, especially on a global basis, rather than make things themselves. So the emphasis on the supply chain and on the procurement function become even more important in an ERP system. One last thing, there are a lot of good ERP software vendors out there. It's not limited to, but SAP and Oracle are two good examples. Most ERP systems are designed to work on a global basis because that's such an important part of the whole concept.